One of Roosevelt's crucial insights was the unappreciated influence of referent groups in everyday life. Early in my career we co-wrote a paper on the subject, although only he went on to make it part of his life's work. Each of us, Roosevelt Thomas contended, feels emotionally and intellectually connected to a specific cohort of the population. We think of this concept as tribalism today, but in the early 1970s, the idea of referent groups to explain social upheaval and the differences among people was a breakthrough concept. A referent group could be vast, like the community of a specific religion or political party, or it could be as small as, say, the people who love the band Phish, aka Phish Heads. It would be impossible to catalog all the referent groups in the United States. They are more numerous than Twitter hashtags, and they procreate like rabbits. Roosevelt Thomas's point was that if you know a person's referent group, to whom or what they feel deeply connected, whom they want to impress, whose respect they crave, you can understand why they talk and think and behave the way they do. The corollary here is that most of us also have a counter-referent group. We base our allegiance and choices on what we oppose rather than what we support, whether it's Democrat versus Republican or Real Madrid versus Barcelona. What we abhor shapes us almost as much as what we love. You don't have to agree with people in other referent groups, but if you appreciate the influence exerted by such groups, you are less likely to be stupefied by their adherents' choices or dismiss them as idiots. *1. I saw how Roosevelt Thomas's theory applied to Mark. I had the false impression that Mark's referent group comprised socially concerned people who were vegan, practiced yoga, and cared about the environment, just like him. The truth was that after 24 years, Mark was still emotionally linked to his aggressive, bespoke suit-wearing, deal-making colleagues at Goldman Sachs. Their approval still mattered to him. Expecting Mark to instantly abandon this referent group was a big ask, akin to demanding that he deny his identity. It was so powerful that he was willing to sacrifice the gift that fell into his lap with the search firm's initial call, namely, the opportunity to recreate his own life. Mark's call triggered an insight. Although I was gratified that my exhortation to start living your own life proved to be a persuasive phrase for him, the teacher in me wondered. If someone as driven and accustomed to success as Mark could be thwarted by his referent group, how many other people, many with fewer resources and opportunities, were being equally blocked for wholly different reasons? What were the forces stopping them from creating their own lives? And what could I do to help? The good news is that it is easier to create your own life today than it has ever been in human history. In the past, almost all of us were second-class citizens from birth. We could not vote and choose our leaders. Conformity was the rule and any difference was punished, whether that difference was whom we loved or which deity we worshipped. If in fact we worshipped any deity. We may have had more sorrow, but we had less regret. You cannot regret your decisions if you're not allowed to make decisions. The trend line of the last 100 years suggests that we will continue acquiring more rights and more freedoms. In much of the world, we are no longer serfs, women can vote, hundreds of millions of people are rising out of poverty, and it's okay to be gay. In other words, many of us have reason to be optimistic. The icing on this layer cake of optimism is technology. In expanding our mobility and access to information, technology has multiplied the number of choices beckoning us. More freedom, more movement, more options in work and play. That's a problem, and I'm hardly the only one making this big claim. One of Peter Drucker's valedictory insights before he died at age 95 in 2005 said as much. In a few hundred years, when the history of our time will be written from a long-term perspective, it is likely that the most important event historians will see is not technology, not the internet, not e-commerce. It is an unprecedented change in the human condition. For the first time, literally, substantial and rapidly growing numbers of people have choices. For the first time, they will have to manage themselves. And society is totally unprepared for it. *2. Freedom and mobility create what Barry Schwartz famously described as the paradox of choice. We do better with fewer choices, not more. Faced with 39 flavors of ice cream, we often make a disappointing choice. It's much easier to pick between two options, say, vanilla or mint chocolate chip, and be satisfied. It's the same with creating your own life in a complex, rapidly advancing world. Not only is it hard to sift through the myriad choices, but even when we know what we want, we don't always know how to follow our dreams. The barriers holding us back in our choices and actions, frustrating our will to live our own life, are formidable and numerous, beginning with these. 1. Our first option, unfortunately, is inertia. Inertia is the most resolute and determinative opponent of change. For years, whenever I've been confronted with clients failing at changing the behavior they insist they want to change, I have fallen back on the following mantra. Our default response in life is not to experience meaning or happiness. Our default response is to experience inertia. I want them not only to appreciate inertia's omnipresence but to see their particular inertia in a new light. We think of inertia as the state of being inert or motionless, one of our purer displays of passivity and disengagement. It's not. Inertia is an active event in which we are persisting in the state we're already in rather than switching to something else. This is not mere semantics. It's a different point of view, characterizing even our most sloth-like passivity as the active choice to persist in the status quo, i.e., no choice is a choice too. It's choosing to say, I'll pass. On the other hand, The moment we shift into a new gear and choose to engage in something different, we cease to persist as inertia's patsy. Being inertia's victim or escaping its malign gravitational pull is a choice that's solely ours to make. When people discover that they have a choice, they are usually empowered to change. Another intriguing characteristic of inertia is how well it provides us with a glimpse of our short-term future. It is more accurate than any algorithm or forecasting model. Inertia is the reason I can stipulate the following rule about your immediate future. The most reliable predictor of what you'll be doing 5 minutes from now is what you're doing now. If you're taking a nap or cleaning your home or shopping online, there's a high probability that you'll be doing the same thing 5 minutes from now. This short-term principle also applies in the long term. The most reliable predictor of who you'll be 5 years from now is who you are now. If you don't know a foreign language now or how to make bread from scratch, you probably won't know in 5 years either. If you're not talking to your estranged father now, chances are you won't be talking to him 5 years from now. And so on for most of the details that describe your life today. Appreciating our agency over inertia's impact teaches us how to shape it into a positive force. When we develop productive, rather than destructive, habits or routines, e.g. exercising first thing in the morning, eating the same nutritious breakfast, taking the same hyper-efficient route to work each day, inertia is our friend, keeping us grounded and committed and consistent. These are the features that make inertia a major force affecting every aspect of an earned life. But even when we gain dominion over inertia, there remain a few other targeted forces that also block us from living our own life. 2. Our programming locks us in place. I grew up in Valley Station, Kentucky, 30 miles south of Louisville, along the section of the Ohio River that forms the Indiana border. I was my mother's only child and she devoted herself to shaping my childhood persona and self-image. She was an elementary school teacher who valued brain over brawn. She programmed me to believe that I was the sharpest kid in town. In addition, perhaps to prevent me from becoming an auto mechanic or electrician or any other kind of skilled craftsman, she regularly reminded me that I had no eye-hand coordination or mechanical skills. Thus, by middle school, I had a talent for math and for acing standardized tests, but I was terrible at anything mechanical or athletic. I couldn't change a light bulb, and the one time in Little League that I actually made contact between ball and bat, it was a foul ball, I received a standing ovation. Fortunately, I responded to my mother's programming with an unshakable faith in my intelligence. Unfortunately, I also developed an unpardonable self-assurance that I didn't need to try very hard at school. I learned that I could coast and still pull down decent grades. This lucky streak continued through college at Rose-Hulman Institute of Technology and the MBA program at Indiana University, and emboldened me, despite my years of suboptimal effort for academic studies, to seek a PhD at UCLA. I could not articulate why I needed a doctorate in organizational behavior or what I would do with it. Coasting had gotten me this far, I reasoned. Why not see where continued coasting could take me? At UCLA, I was blessed with classmates who were my intellectual superiors and professors who were not only light years smarter but also intimidating presences who were not shy about humiliating me for my vanities and hypocrisies. It was a necessary comeuppance. I was 26 years old and finally learning that I was at UCLA to earn a PhD, not merely receive it. I needed that many years to overcome the unintended consequences of my mother's programming. All of us are programmed in some way by our parents. Mom and dad can't help it, and it's usually well-meaning. They shape our beliefs, our social values, how we treat other people, how we behave in a relationship, even which sports teams we cheer for. More than anything else, they program our self-image. From our early days in the crib, before we can crawl, walk, or speak, they're forensically studying our behavior for clues about our talents and potential. This is most obvious when siblings are involved. Over time, with enough evidence, our parents subdivide us into distinct personalities. The smart one, pretty one, strong one, nice one, responsible one. Whichever of the many descriptors seems to apply at the time. It's as if they're unwittingly trying to turn us into an archetype of a human being, erasing all the nuance. If we're not careful, we not only accept the programming but adapt our behavior to it. The smart one falls back on cleverness rather than expertise, the pretty one relies on her looks, the strong one prefers raw power to persuasion, the nice one acquiesces too quickly, the responsible one sacrifices too much in the name of duty. Whose life are we living when decisive parts of it, imprinted during our formative years by people we love, have already been created for us? The good news is that we have the right to deprogram ourselves whenever we want. Our programming is only a problem when it becomes a life blocker. We consider trying something new, a U-turn in our career, a new haircut, then reject it with excuses such as, I've never been good at underscore, or, it's not me. Until we, or someone else, challenge the validity of our excuses, says who? We cannot imagine imposing our will upon beliefs that we've come to accept as gospel. Our programming's biggest impact is how proficiently it blinds us to our need to reject it. 3. We are undone by obligation. You might be familiar with a poignant scene in the 1989 Ron Howard film, Parenthood, starring Steve Martin as Gil Buckman, beleaguered father of 3, and Mary Steenburgen as his serenely accepting wife, Karen. Late in the movie, after we learn that their oldest child, Kevin, has emotional issues and that Gil has just quit a job he hates, Karen informs Gil that she is unexpectedly pregnant with their 4th child. In the middle of a tense conversation about their new situation, Gil starts to leave to coach his son's little league team into last place. Karen asks, "Do you really have to go?" Halfway out the door, Gil turns back to her with a crazed look and spits out, "My whole life is have to." The beauty of obligation is that it directs us to keep our promises to others, implied or explicit. The misery of obligation is how often those promises conflict with the ones we've made to ourselves. In those moments, we tend to overcorrect, choosing between the extremes of selfless and selfish, and end up disappointing either ourselves or those who depend on us. Obligation forces us to prioritize our responsibilities. It is a gray area, with few norms to guide us beyond the golden rule and do the right thing. In my experience, there are no rules for dealing with obligation. Each situation is different. Sometimes it's proper and noble to be selfless. We join the family business instead of pursuing a more exciting career. We stay at a dull or hateful job for the paycheck that covers the family bills. We turn down the career-making job in another city because we don't want to uproot the family. There's fulfillment in honoring our obligations to our loved ones. That said, sometimes it's okay to put ourselves first, in spite of what others think. Such sacrifices and compromises can be agonizing and costly. They're not easily made, but they are honorable and essential too. As the great journalist Herbert Bayard Swope, winner of the first Pulitzer Prize for reporting in 1917, said, "I can't give you a surefire formula for success. But I can give you a formula for failure. Try to please everybody all the time." 4. We suffer from a failure of imagination. Choosing between 2 or 3 valid ideas for the life you want to lead is a legitimate source of confusion for many people. On the other hand, some people cannot imagine one path for themselves, let alone 2 or 3. I used to think creativity was a matter of taking 2 slightly dissimilar ideas and merging them into something original, e.g. serving lobster with steak and calling it surf and turf. You add A and B and come up with D. Then a successful artist told me I was setting the bar too low. Creativity is more like taking A and F and L and coming up with Z. The greater the distance between the parts, the greater the imagination required to make them whole. Only a precious few of us are A plus F plus L equals Z creative. Some of us are A plus B equals D creative. And, sadly, some of us can't even imagine a world where A and B are in the same room. Reading this book is proof that you're curious about self-improvement. Curiosity is how we prepare to fire up our imagination and picture something new. If you're among the 30% of Americans who have a college degree, you already know from your teenage years what it feels like to seek an identity reboot, a new presentation of self that will improve your odds of earning your place in the world. You already know how to imagine a fresh start. The Pulitzer Prize-winning novelist Richard Russo, author of Empire Falls, remembering his undergraduate years, wrote, "College, after all, is where we go to reinvent ourselves, to sever our ties with the past, to become the person we always wanted to be and were prevented from being by people who knew better." Russo compared college to entering the witness protection program. You're supposed to try on a new identity or two. Indeed, it would not only defeat the purpose, it would be downright dangerous to leave the program easily recognizable as the person who'd entered it. Think back to your senior year in high school. I'd venture to say that applying to college is the first time you felt control over your future. Although the process is rigidly shaped by a cartel of guidance counselors, testing companies, and college admissions officers, not to mention your parents, at 18 you were nonetheless running the show. You assessed your strengths and weaknesses. You answered basic questions to set the criteria for the schools: distance, size, prestige, selectivity, social life, climate, cost, financial aid, and other factors. You chose how many schools to apply to. You wrote the essays and secured the recommendations. Then you waited for a decision. If your third or fourth choice college offered significantly better financial aid than your top choice, you adapted, either by solving the cost issue, taking out loans and working your way through college, or settling for the less appealing school and taking the money. Asterisk 3. Then you matriculated and discovered that whether you were the prom queen or class clown in high school, the socialite or brainy geek, college was your opportunity to delete your adolescence and write a new script. As Russo suggests, you could accurately measure the success or failure of your college years by how recognizable you were at graduation compared to the person who had entered the scene 4 years earlier. You did it once, you can do it again. 5. We are winded by the pace of change. If making big claims about society was part of my job description, it isn't. Here's the one claim. Learned from Rob Nail of Singularity University, I'd make with confidence. The pace of change you are experiencing today is the slowest pace of change you will ever experience for the rest of your life. In other words, slow is today, fast is tomorrow. You're deluding yourself in pointless nostalgia if you think that, no matter the situation, at some point in the near future, when you finish the Rush project or when the kids get older and your domestic life calms down, you can revert to a slower time when the pace of life and the speed at which it changed was more relaxed and gentle. It is not going to happen. You and your workmates won't immediately chill out when you finish the Rush project. Another emergency job will appear, count on it, and you'll learn that rush pace is your new normal. The same with your hectic domestic life. It won't calm down when the kids get older or leave the nest. It's a wheel that won't stop turning. There's always something that needs to be dealt with right away. Some years ago I hailed a taxi in Manhattan to take me to the airport. The driver drove slowly through midtown traffic, never exceeding 20 miles per hour. He accelerated to a racier 35 miles per hour once we got on the 55 miles per hour roads outside the city. When I asked him if he could go faster, he declined. "This is how fast I drive," he said. "If you like, I'll stop and let you out now." It was as if he had learned to drive in a different time, never noticing that cars had become peppier, roads were better, and passengers were in a hurry. Our failure to adapt to the quickening pace of change blocks us in the same ways that a failure of imagination does. We cannot interpret what's happening around us. If we cannot keep up, we get winded and fall behind. And when we fall behind, we are living in everyone else's past. 6. We are narcotized by vicarious living. When I challenged Mark Tursic to start living his own life, I could easily have asked, "Why are you living someone else's life?" There are really two sides of the same coin known as vicarious living. This is the most alarming soul-leeching development I've observed in the last 20 years. Because of social media and a smorgasbord of technological distractions, we have an abundance of opportunities to live through other people's lives rather than live our own. We allow ourselves to be impressed by strangers' social media posturings. Sometimes we return the favor by posturing to impress them, ignoring the likelihood that they're not paying attention to us as avidly as we pay attention to them. In one of vicarious living's more absurd incarnations, we have graduated from playing video games ourselves, itself a simulation of real life, to paying money to watch elite game players compete against one another in our favorite video games. We have gone from watching to watching others do our watching. Narcotized by technology, we sacrifice long-term purpose and fulfillment for the short-term dopamine-driven feedback loops created by Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. This is not healthy. As with the pace of change, I don't see a horizon where this societal problem slows down because a majority of us suddenly stop using social media's irresistible tools. Only we can control how profoundly we allow vicarious living to infect our life, one individual at a time. The damage from this trend toward vicarious living is one of heightened distraction. Instead of focusing on what we know we should be doing, we are, in T.S. Eliot's immortal phrasing, distracted from distraction by distraction. It's not just social media's fault. Our entire world operates as a distraction engine. A warm sunny day, a baseball game on TV, breaking news on the radio, a phone call, a knock at the door, a family emergency, a sudden craving for a donut. Anyone or anything can pull our focus from doing what we should be doing and coax us into doing what others want us to do. That's one definition of not living your own life. 7. We have run out of runway. A friend told me the story of a man named Joe who wanted to be a playwright but discovered in his mid-20s that his true passion was wine. So Joe switched gears and became a wine writer. He would get paid to taste and learn about wine by writing about it. A portion of every writing fee went to buying wine for himself. He was starting out in the late 1970s, long before the world's great wines were priced upward for billionaires. With this head start, on his modest journalist's salary he amassed a 15,000 bottle collection that was the envy of the wine world. He was generous, not miserly, with his rare wines. If you invited Joe and his wife to your home for dinner, he'd offer to provide the wine, and you'd be a fool to say no. The great winemakers knew him and included him on the short list of connoisseurs who got first crack every year at their limited supply of new vintages. The day came in his mid-60s when Joe received the annual pre-release offering from one of Italy's superstars, Angelo Gaggia. Joe did the calculation and realized that he would have to live well into his 90s before that year's Gaggia offering would be ready to drink. Thus, he made the poignant call to Signor Gaggia, and then repeated the same calls to other winemakers, asking to be removed from their lists. He had enough of their wines in his cellar to last a lifetime. As a wine collector, Joe didn't have any more runway. Runway is the time we've meted out to ourselves to achieve our destiny. Some of us, elite athletes, fashion models, ballet dancers, and any other performer, relying on physical vigor or beauty, which fades with time, can calculate our runway as precisely as Joe. Many American politicians, e.g. presidents and 36 of 50 state governors, have term limits that detail to the day how much time they have to achieve their agenda. Most of us, artists, doctors, scientists, investors, teachers, writers, executives, and others who use our brain for a living, assume that our runway extends for as long as we retain our faculties and desire. The rest of us don't have enough information to calculate our runway or appreciate when it has ended. There are two occasions when runway becomes a major obstacle. When we're young, we tend to overestimate our runway. Money may be scarce, but time seems infinite, dampening our sense of urgency. We put off the start of our real life to test more appealing or fanciful options. We've got time to take a so-called gap year. Nothing wrong with that, except when indecision or inertia extends our gap year into a gap decade, or worse, a gap life. The other extreme, when we're old, is more invidious. We foolishly believe there's not enough time to achieve our next dream. We have aged out. I see this all the time when my CEO clients are approaching retirement age. Material success is not a concern. They are willingly moving on and passing the leadership torch to the next generation. They still want meaning and purpose in their lives, but through a catastrophic misinterpretation of the significance of their past, present, and future, see Chapter 5, they let their age shut down the opportunity for a fresh start. They think no one will hire or invest in a 65-year-old when so many younger candidates are available. Asterisk 4. They're staring at a broken clock, convinced that time has stopped for them. Adults are capable of miscalculating their personal runway at any age, from 25 to 70 and beyond. I know 30-year-olds who, after 3 years of law school and a half-dozen years climbing the associate ladder at a firm, realize that practicing law is not for them. It's a commonplace for young attorneys at corporate firms in the 21st century. Paralyzed by the prospect of restarting their career at ground zero, the young attorneys struggle in 3 ways. First, they treat their early disappointment as a catastrophe rather than the blessing it actually is. After all, they're escaping a job that bores them. Second, they cannot imagine a next step. And third, they don't appreciate that they have 2/3 of their adult life ahead of them. That's a lot of runway, which some people find daunting. I suggest it is a lifeline. Parental influence, obligation, mental block, peer pressure, not enough time, inertial devotion to the status quo. These are the perennial barriers that freeze us in place and leave us yearning for a new path yet unable to take the first step on that path. But these barriers are just temporary obstructions that can be pushed aside so we can move on. They are not permanent disqualifying conditions or articles of faith that we cannot rewrite or replace. We possess offsetting attributes that enable us to find our way. They're not a big mystery. They are latent powers such as motivation, ability, understanding, and confidence that reside within all of us, waiting to be stirred to life under the right conditions. They are the building blocks of our potential, and we need to be reminded on occasion how to deploy them for our own benefit. Skip notes. Asterisk 1 for the record, teachers are my referent group. My mother was a teacher, and she was my biggest influence growing up. Thus, I identify with teachers. I judge myself on my ability to impart what I know to help others. The respect I value most comes from teachers. That said, this personal fact is hidden, rarely revealed or openly discussed. Even lifelong friends might not know this about me unless I told them. That's how mysterious a person's referent group can be. You have to probe hard to figure it out. Your reward, though, is an eye-opening recalibration and understanding of someone you only thought you knew. Asterisk 2 Peter F. Drucker, Managing Knowledge Means Managing Oneself, Leader to Leader 16, Spring 2000, 8-10. Asterisk 3 Worst case, if disaster struck and you were shut out by all your top choices except your safety school, you learned how quickly you can accept and make peace with the tragedy of being offered only one choice. It is a lesson in taking lemons and making lemonade in your introduction to the agency that comes from having no choice. We'll take a closer look at that in Chapter 4. Asterisk 4 They're not entirely wrong. People tend to prefer new over demonstrably good. Oceanofpdf.com. Exercise. We now interrupt our scheduled programming. This is an exercise to help you understand your programming. Imagine that you are 6. Your parents have invited their best friends for dinner. After dinner, with the adults believing that you are in bed asleep, one of the guests asks what you are really like. Assuming they will get the unvarnished truth from your parents. List the adjectives your parents would use to describe the 6-year-old you. List the adjectives you would use to describe yourself today. What, if anything, has changed? How did it change? Why did it change? What did you learn from this exercise that will help you plan the rest of your life? Oceanofpdf.com. Chapter 3. The Earning Checklist. In 1976, when I was 27, I wrote my doctoral thesis on motivation, ability, understanding, and confidence, isolating them as the 4 cognitive and emotional qualities that people needed in order to be successful. Motivation I defined as the force that drives us to get up each morning and pursue a specific objective and also maintain that drive in the face of setbacks and reversals. Ability was having the aptitude and skills required to achieve a goal. Understanding was knowing what to do and how to do it, and also what not to do. Confidence was the belief that you can actually accomplish what you set out to do, whether you've done it before or attempting it for the first time. Those 4 attributes are still essential success factors, and not as, obvious as you might think. Remove any one of these virtues from your toolbox and you've dramatically increased your odds of failing. It's also important to remember that these are task-specific attributes. They are not forces that apply universally to your life. For example, there is no such thing as a motivated person, because none of us is motivated to do everything. We are selectively motivated, driven to do one thing but not another. The same is true of ability, understanding, and confidence. Each is task-specific, because none of us is able to do everything, or know everything, or be confident in every situation. This was my argument in 1976, when I was 27. But 40 years in the business world as an executive coach have taught me that these 4 attributes don't provide a full picture. My thesis wasn't wrong, it was incomplete. Time has taught me that you can't color success only in the bold hues of desire, talent, intellect, and self-belief. You need support, as well as a receptive market for each of your specific tasks or goals. Mind you, there are many personal assets that improve your chances for success, e.g. creativity, discipline, resilience, empathy, humor, gratitude, education, timing, likability, and so on. But when clients young and old come to me for advice about major career decisions, whether to stay or go, whether the new job is right for them, what to do next, the following are the 6 must-have considerations I ask about. Without good answers for each of them, there is no next step. They're as basic as the pulse and blood pressure readings your doctor takes to begin your annual physical. 1. Motivation. Motivation is the reason you try to succeed at a chosen task. It's why you do anything. In August 1979, Ted Kennedy challenged President Jimmy Carter in his bid for re-election. Although politicians rarely took on incumbent presidents from the same party in a primary fight, Kennedy at the time was a heavy favorite to defeat the unpopular Carter. He announced his bid in a widely seen TV interview with CBS's Roger Mudd, who started with the obvious softball question, "Why do you want to be president?" Kennedy, infamously, flubbed the answer, offering a meandering, incoherent response that didn't give people a reason to vote for him and essentially ended his campaign before it began. Like millions of Americans who watched the interview, I remember thinking, it's not enough that being president satisfies some personal ambition to reach the top rung of the political ladder. In telling me why you want to be president, you must also reveal the specific things you want to do in the job, whether it's building roads, or feeding hungry children, or lowering interest rates. They were hovering around 18% that year. I was hearing neither why Kennedy wanted the job nor how he would do it if he moved into the White House. Motivation may be the high-octane fuel that drives our goal achievement, but it cannot be divorced from the actual doing of the specific tasks required to achieve each of our goals. That's what makes motivation one of the more misunderstood, and therefore misused, words in the lexicon of goal achievement. Several times a week I hear people describe themselves, or someone they admire, as motivated to succeed, or motivated to be a good boss, or teacher or father or partner or some other broadly defined role. Used in that context, motivated has no meaning, because I don't know anyone who's motivated not to succeed, or motivated to be a bad boss. Motivation is being confused with desire. They may as well be saying, I want to succeed, or I want to be a good boss. Who doesn't? Being motivated is not merely a supercharged emotional state induced by having a goal. It is that heightened emotional state coupled with a supercharged impulse to do each of the specific tasks required to achieve that goal. It is incorrect to say that you are motivated to make money or lose weight or become fluent in Mandarin, even if you feel such statements are true, unless you consistently do the big and small things required to achieve such goals. The true test of our motivation is grounded in evidence. If we want to run a marathon in under 3 hours, are we motivated to do each of the necessary tasks that such an arduous physical achievement requires? Wake up early in the morning 6 times a week to accumulate our mileage goals. Reconfigure our diet so that it is in the service of maximum performance. Put in the hours at the gym to build our strength and flexibility to lessen the chance of injury. And summon the common sense to take a day off when our body tells us we need to rest and recover? Anything less and we're kidding ourselves about being motivated. As a coach helping successful people change for the better, it's not my job to judge people's stated motivations. My job is to establish their resolve. Our lives can be filled with ambiguous motivations. Rewards such as money, fame, advancement, awards, and prestige have the power either to make us try harder or to leave us asking, is that all there is? Obligations to our loved ones either make us proud that we answered the call to duty or bitter about what we had to sacrifice. Overconfidence and wishful thinking either push us to exceed expectations, always a pleasant surprise, or leave us puzzled by our folly. What was I thinking? Who am I to say which of these are false gods and which are legitimate? Misunderstanding our motivation and overestimating our willingness to fulfill it may be the two defining errors you'll face as you create your own life. But you need to anticipate a few other avoidable errors as you find your true motivation. Motivation is a strategy, not a tactic. Motive is the reason we act in a certain way. Motivation is the reason we continue acting that way. It's the difference between impulsively going running on a sunny afternoon to release some restless energy and running 6 days a week month after month because you want to get fit, or lose weight, or train for a race. In identifying your motivation, be sure to grade it on its long-term sustainability, and be realistic about your ability to sustain in the face of risk, insecurity, rejection, and difficulty. 2 questions. How have you responded to adversity in the past? Why will it be different this time? You can have more than one motivation. Joyce Carol Oates, America's prodigious woman of letters, in her essay, This I Believe, identified not 1 but 5 reasons she writes. 1. Commemoration, memorializing a region of the world in which I have lived. 2. Bearing witness, because most people cannot do so for themselves. 3. Self-expression as a stay against the compromises of adulthood. 4. Propaganda, or moralizing, to evoke sympathy for her characters. And 5. A love for the aesthetic object that is a physical book. When one motivation is lacking, another keeps her writing. Successful people can hold 2 or more opposing thoughts in their mind at the same time. The same goes for your motivation. Inertia is not motivation. I know Florida retirees who play golf practically every day. Is it their love for the game or a burning desire to lower their handicap that motivates them to spend so many hours hitting a little white ball around a very large lawn? Or is it inertia? They don't have a better idea how to spend their day. If you find that you're living the same day every day, you could ask yourself the same question. Am I living my current life because it's how I choose to find fulfillment, or because I can't imagine an alternative? An honest answer is essential, but possibly too painful to bear. So how do we zero in on a specific motivation? Experience has taught me that there is at least one universal baseline motivation guaranteed to clarify our desire to live an earned life, and it is this. I want to live a life that will increase fulfillment and minimize regret. 2. Ability. Your ability is the level of skill you need to succeed at your chosen task. Ideally, you know what you're good at and what you're bad at, and you take on tasks beyond your abilities only because you want to stretch. Otherwise, you stay within your wheelhouse of superior skills. If you have a superior skill, something that sets you apart, it should go hand in glove with motivation. Staying motivated to do something you excel at should not be a problem. And yet it is. My friend Sanyan Siang, the co-founder and director of the Coach K Center on Leadership and Ethics at Duke University, believes that each of us has at least one skill that we take for granted and are perplexed when we discover that it's out of reach for everyone else. She calls this the liability of expertise. Perfect pitch, supernatural eye-hand coordination, blazing foot speed, repeating Kendrick Lamar lyrics word for word after one listen. Such talents are a liability, says Sanyan, because they come so easily to us. As a result, they don't feel fully earned, and therefore we discount the many ways they make us special. It's like having a superpower and never using it. This is a worrisome insight. If we can't embrace ability that comes easily to us, what's the alternative? Creating a career in areas where our abilities are less than optimal, where we're in the middle of the pack and not so special. I wouldn't recommend that either. But we're defining ability too narrowly here, as if it exists between being preternaturally gifted at one extreme and possessing the bare minimum skill to do the job at the other. Emotional and psychological elements, temperament, doggedness, persuasiveness, equanimity, play an equally crucial role in establishing ability. Dealing with rejection, for example, is an essential skill for salespeople and actors, no matter how silver-tongued their sales pitch or how moving their line deliveries. Oncologists spend decades in a lab testing and waiting for a cancer treatment protocol to prove effective, with no guarantee that their efforts will ever deliver a breakthrough. Their heroic defiance of failure again and again, not their biochemistry expertise, is what defines their ability to find a cure. If you want to write novels for a living, a willingness to be alone at your desk day after day is as necessary as your facility with plot, character, and dialogue. Being comfortable with solitude draws you to your desk each morning. My mother was an elementary school teacher from the 1950s through the 1970s in rural Kentucky. When she filled in her students' report cards, she gave them a letter grade in 3 categories: achievement, effort, and conduct. There was also a side box for attendance. Educators back then, it seems, knew that a student's ability was more than knowing the right answers on a test. Trying, behaving well, and showing up counted too. Not much has changed for us in adulthood. Our ability is not one isolated talent. It's a portfolio of skills and personality traits that have to match up with the life we want to lead. 3. Understanding. Understanding is your knowledge of what to do and how to do it. In my doctoral thesis, which focused on behavior in groups, I regarded understanding in terms of role perception, viewing it through the prism of order and rank. Do people understand their role in the hierarchy? For example, as an engineer, you have the same ability as all the other engineers in your department, more or less. Like them, you are a cog in a big machine. In that situation, which is how we studied organizational behavior 50 years ago, understanding means knowing what particular job in the machine you're expected to do, and not deviating from your role. There's no misunderstanding between you and your superiors about your responsibilities. You stay in your lane. The lane may be more complex and crowded for, say, an emergency room doctor or a police officer, each of whom must play many roles during a work shift. But the successful doctor understands the job is about alleviating pain and repairing damage. The successful police officer understands it is about keeping people safe. They stay in their lanes too. When I started working one-on-one with executives to improve their interpersonal skills, my views changed. Roles still mattered, but so did so-called softer attributes, such as timing, gratitude, kindness, listening, and, most valuable of all, trusting the golden rule. These are the values that guide us in any situation, including the pursuit of an earned life. It required a small but painful teachable moment for me to realize this. I was invited to speak at a dinner event for an insurance company's key managers, and I completely misread my audience. I was too jocular for a group whose company had recently suffered a serious reversal. Afterward, the CEO told me I'd offended him and his team. The evening was a disappointment for him, and his critique was torture to hear. The error was all mine, of course, and it was an error of understanding. I'd misunderstood my role, assuming I was there as one part teacher, one part entertainer, when in fact I was the company's guest. That was my role, and I'd basically walked into their home with mud on my shoes. Saving the situation required soft values, in this case, focusing on the CEO's disappointment rather than my shame, and observing the present moment clearly. I needed to read the CEO standing in front of me better than I'd read the room earlier in the evening. I considered offering to speak for free the next time, but given my performance, the CEO wasn't in the mood for a next time. I considered doing nothing, hoping that time would heal this wound. But in that instant I remembered the truism that customers will forgive any problem if they can see that you care enough to correct it swiftly. That's when the golden rule kicked in. What would I expect if the tables were turned and I were the displeased CEO? I understood what needed to be done. Although the speaking fee was significant, as much as some people make in a year, I told the CEO, "This one's on me." When the check arrived a few days later, I returned it to him with an apologetic note. I understood that both of us needed proper closure, me more than him. Part of understanding is knowing the difference between good and not good enough, and accepting that in any situation, we can be one or the other. 4. Confidence. Confidence is your belief that you can succeed. You acquire confidence through an imprecise alchemy of training, repetition, steady improvement, and a string of successful results, each one feeding the other. We feel confident most often when we're facing a challenge that we've successfully overcome before, e.g. speaking in public. A less appreciated source of confidence is having a special skill that other people lack. I once asked a marathoner friend, not quite elite, but dedicated to his training and someone other amateur runners paid attention to in a race, how many miles a week he had to log in order to meet his goals. "It's not about mileage," he said. "It's about developing speed so you're confident you can outrun anyone when it matters." Speed instills the confidence. The confidence creates more speed. I knew that confidence was essential in skill sports like golf or baseball. Sports history is filled with athletes who lose their confidence and overnight can't find the fairway or throw a curveball over the plate. But I'd never thought that it mattered in long-distance running, which struck me as an exercise in brute force endurance rather than athletic skill. But I take my friend's point. When you have speed and believe you can call on it at will, you're creating a positive feedback loop that creates more speed, and thus even more confidence. That's the beauty of confidence. It is the product of all your other positive virtues and choices, and then it returns the favor by making you even stronger in those areas. As a general rule, if you have motivation, ability, and understanding, lacking confidence is unfortunate, almost inexcusable. You have earned the right to be confident. 5. Support. Support is the external help you need to succeed. It comes to your rescue, like the cavalry, via 3 sources. Support can come from an organization in the form of money, equipment, even office space, anything you consider a valuable resource. Support like this is not easily acquired in organizations with limited resources. You have to earn your share of the pie. Support can come from an individual in the form of direction, or coaching, or instruction, or empowerment, or confidence building. These supporters can be your teacher, mentor, boss, or simply someone in authority who takes a shine to you. The latter, in my opinion, is the single greatest piece of career luck you can have, but you have to appreciate your luck. I once asked the youngest partner at a large law firm how he got to be the head of the firm's employment practice before he was 35. He said, "I left my previous firm because of a toxic boss who was actively antagonistic to me." The partner I reported to here is the opposite. He told me from day one that he had a 5-year plan to retire and make me his successor. If I did what he told me to do, it was my job to lose. His support made all the difference. Support can also be a defined group. The curious thing about a support group is not that we need one to reach our goals, but how reluctant we are to admit it. This denial makes sense when you consider the front and center contributions of motivation, ability, understanding, and confidence in our success. We develop them quietly and privately as solo actors, ignoring the impact of the outside world. It also makes sense in the context of living an earned life. Earning something, whether it's a raise or respect or our entire life, implies self-sufficiency, as if our achievements come about without anyone's assistance and are therefore more glorious and honorable. That's delusional thinking. We all need help. Accepting that fact is an act of wisdom, not a sign of weakness. Acting on it is an essential skill. This is particularly true if you work as a sole practitioner or freelancer. In organizations, corporate, governmental, or nonprofit, your support groups are built into the infrastructure. CEOs have a board of directors, managers have their weekly meetings, and the support staff, left to their own devices, instinctively form their own small cells to support one another. Feedback, ideas, and cheerleading are always there if you want them. When recent refugees from corporate life go out on their own and say they miss the camaraderie in a big organization, they're really admitting that they miss the support. Here's a not-so-dirty secret of super successful people. The smartest, most accomplished people I know are the most avid builders of their own support group and the most reliant on their group for help, and they're not shy about admitting it. I know this because I coach some of them. Being in their support group is part of my job. I see how often they go beyond the walls of their organization for counsel and comfort. I see how they use the advice and how it connects directly to their success. For them, a support group is like having a higher gear to make things happen more smoothly and quickly. If it works for them, why not let it work for you? Your support group can include anyone, even a family member or two. A half dozen people is a manageable number. More than that and the support gets repetitive or confusing. You can even have multiple support groups for different occasions, depending on how complex and varied your life is. The cast of characters can change over time as you and the world change too. My only caveat: never be the most admired or successful person in your group. You're seeking help, not a fanbase, nor the least accomplished. Somewhere in the middle is right. 6. Marketplace. I've seen this so many times within families, it's practically commonplace. A sister and brother grow up in the same household, attend the same school system, and then have completely different career goals. The sister wants to be a professional with an advanced degree, say an engineer. The brother, no less focused or ambitious but preferring a dreamier, less well-charted path, bypasses the traditional college route for the life of, say, an artisanal knife maker. The would-be engineer completes her education and enters a well-established albeit highly competitive industrial ecosystem for her skills. She glides into her career because a solid marketplace of manufacturers, high-tech companies, and design firms exists for her services. There's always demand for engineers. Not so for the knife maker. If the brother's timing is off, he may begin his career at a moment when the market for his skills is overcrowded or being disrupted by some innovation. The marketplace that should have greeted him with open arms is more unruly and vulnerable to changing consumer preferences than he imagined. It may even be vanishing in front of his eyes. Two people from the same home who knew exactly the life they wanted to create for themselves. Two different outcomes, each depending on the marketplace for their skills. It's romantic to think that we can pursue our most ardent dreams without regard to earning a living. The fact is, not only do the vast majority of us need to earn a living, if only to pay our bills and provide for our families, but through rearing or inclination, most of us can't help linking our sense of fulfillment and self-esteem to our material compensation. Unless we inherited wealth, it is only after we've accumulated enough in one career that we can afford the luxury of a new career in which money doesn't matter. Anyone who relies on a paycheck knows this. Yet every day thousands of Americans start up a business, or go back to school, or move to another part of the country, or quit their cushy job to strike out on their own, all hoping to improve their prospects for a fulfilling life, without asking the hard-nosed question. Is there a market for my product or service if I start up the business, or get my advanced degree, or move to a new town, or no longer work at a big company? Years ago, one of my best friends made this mistake. He was earning a 7-figure salary as the top strategy expert at a powerful consulting firm, but he thought he could do better striking out on his own. Several of us in his support group warned him about the obvious risk in leaving a big firm, namely, that the credibility and prestigious client list that came with his position there would immediately shrink when he changed over to running his own shop. He didn't believe us. Sadly, the marketplace rejected him. Clients he counted on to jump to him chose to stay with the big company. He never recovered. If there is no market for what you're offering, and you don't happen to be the rare visionary who creates a new industry out of thin air, all your skill, confidence, and support will not overcome that hurdle. As Yogi Berra said, if the fans don't want to come out to the ballpark, no one can stop them. These are the 4 internal and 2 external factors you have to consider and check off to gauge your chances of success at any challenging task or goal. An accomplished chef will tell you that the first crucial consideration in cooking is the concept of mise en place, having all the ingredients for a dish in place in the kitchen, prepared and ready to go. Then the cooking begins. Like most checklists, mise en place is the bluntest of organizing tools, but it is also a mindset anchoring a chef's motivation, ability, understanding, and, most of all, confidence. With everything in place, the chef is liberated to create and do what she does best, turn ordinary ingredients into something extraordinary. Consider this earning checklist as your mise en place before taking on any challenge that matters to you. Candidly test yourself. Am I motivated to do this? And able? Do I understand how to harness my ability to get the job done? Do my past achievements make me confident that I can do this? Do I have support? Is there a marketplace that will appreciate the effort? Each of these 6 factors must be aligned, each one enhancing the other. They are not a la carte. You can't be strong on 5 of them and weak on the other. Each one is sufficiently broad to include the qualities that are specific to you, which makes them the ideal set of fundamental questions when you confront big change. Checking each box tells us whether we have alignment or not. Here, for example, is a recap of my checklist conversation with a friend named Marie who started up a pasta sauce business 3 years earlier. She had been a retired food professional whose homemade sauce was so good friends kept telling her, "You should sell this." So she did. You tell me if she has alignment. Motivation. I get a kick out of making a special product that customers appreciate. I'm doing this for that validation, not the money. Not yet, at least. Ability. My first job out of college was developing recipes for food companies. I know how to write a recipe and develop something authentically new. Understanding. No one is born knowing how to do a startup. You learn it as you go. I follow the rule of fools. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Confidence. I've created 3 distinct products, we call them SKUs, for the brand. It's not foolish to expect a 4th idea and a 5th to show up. It'll happen. Support. We entered an accelerator contest last year and we were one of 5 small companies chosen to be mentored for 6 months by experts in the food industry, mostly for the purpose of attracting investors, which doesn't interest us yet. When I don't know something, I call my mentors. Marketplace. People will always need ready-made sauce to put on their pasta and pizza, to stuff their peppers, to make chili. Our niche is the high end. We don't need everyone to buy, just the right sliver of the market, and those people are finding us. Then I asked Marie if she felt aligned. Alignment is something I felt right away, she said, because I was enjoying myself. 2 years into it, though, when we were showing a little profit, I started wondering what was the purpose of all this work if I wasn't taking a salary yet. What was the endgame? One of the mentors told me that startups aim either for steady profit growth or being bought out. I decided our goal was getting someone to buy us, after which we could keep at it with more resources or move on. That gave me clarity and purpose. I felt aligned again. Marie had all the right answers. Can you say the same about the life you're living right now? Oceanofpdf.com. Exercise. Find your adjacency. A successful photographer can make a midlife conversion to cinematographer or director, but she probably can't remake herself into a brain surgeon. Cinematography and directing are adjacent in ability and understanding to photography, working with cameras, people, and ideas. Neurosurgery is not. That's what makes adjacency an interesting consideration when we run through the checklist for creating an earned life. If motivation, ability, understanding, confidence, support, and marketplace, all operating in alignment, are must-have factors, then adjacency is a nice-to-have factor. When we are frustrated with our life or career and yearn for something more gratifying, it may be emotionally soothing to imagine a life that's 180 degrees removed from our current predicament. But the odds of success favor the people who do not stray too far from their expertise, experience, and relationships. That doesn't mean we're restricted to small and incremental change in our lives. The change can be huge. But it requires adjacency, some connection, however indirect, to our track record of accomplishment. Jim Yong Kim is the biggest brain I know. An MD and a PhD in anthropology from Harvard, an expert in global health and infectious diseases, co-founder of Partners in Health, department chair at Harvard Medical School, director of the World Health Organization's HIV vs. AIDS division, the recipient of a MacArthur Genius Grant, perennially included in annual lists of influential leaders. Which explains why, in 2009, as Dr. Jim turned 50, Dartmouth College wanted him to be its next president. Dr. Jim and I discussed the pros and cons. At Dartmouth, he'd be dealing with faculty, donors, and a notoriously fractious student body, quite a departure from a life spent tackling public health crises. On the other hand, he'd succeeded at everything he'd ever tried. He wouldn't be away from home so much. It would be a good base for his family of 2 young boys. And he was familiar with academic life in the Ivy League. I urged him to take it. It would be an interesting challenge. What I forgot to consider was adjacency. Was there enough in the job that played to his scientific expertise and would motivate him the way his previous roles did? He could handle the job, but while he loved Dartmouth and its students, he wasn't using all his talents. 3 years into his presidency, the World Bank asked him to take over its mammoth organization in Washington, D.C. We discussed the pros and cons again. At first glance, running the World Bank sounded like an even greater leap into non-adjacency than a university presidency. Jim knew very little about international finance. But the World Bank is not a financial institution like J.P. Morgan Chase. It is a global partnership that distributes money to developing nations to eradicate poverty. Global, partnership, poverty. These words defined Jim's life. In Jim's mind, poverty and public health crises weren't merely adjacent. They were one and the same. If he took the job, he could redirect the World Bank's mission to reduce poverty by waging war on specific diseases that attack the most vulnerable people. This time, I didn't have to convince him to make the move. He knew it was in his wheelhouse. As a result of his 7 years at the World Bank, it's estimated that programs he's been associated with have saved 20 million lives. I'd sacrifice a limb or two to have that on my resume. Most of the time we know when our skills are adjacent to the opportunity facing us. Adjacency is an elusive concept only when our next opportunity sounds like a stretch, an uncharted departure from who we used to be and who we'd like to become. But if the adjacency exists and we find it, the stretch soon makes perfect sense. To discover your adjacency to the life you are creating, you have to find one asset in yourself that is essential for success in your new life. For example, there was a time 50 years ago when a professional athlete or coach moving into the sports broadcast booth after retirement sounded like a stretch. Not anymore, once TV executives realized that athletes really knew their sport and had credibility talking to fellow athletes on camera. The adjacency was the ball players' savviness about their sport, their mastery of the content, not their on-air delivery, which could be learned on the job. Do this. List the 20 or so people in your career with whom you communicate most frequently over, say, a 3-month period. Is there one standout skill or personal quality that you share with the listed people whom you most admire? If so, is it the kind of skill that can take you far in a totally different field? That is, does who you want to become match up with who you already are? Being a creative director at an advertising agency may not seem at first like the perfect training for becoming a screenwriter, but it makes perfect sense when you appreciate the 2 roles' adjacency. They both require a gift for storytelling. It's the same with salesmanship. If you have the ability to sell, you have adjacency to any career that requires persuasion and making people part with their money. Once you appreciate the quality that distinguishes you from other people, you begin to see all the opportunities where that skill might come in handy. Adjacency dramatically expands your options. Oceanofpdf.com. Chapter 4. The Agency of No Choice. Whenever possible, I avoid making choices. Look into my closet at home and you'll find a rack of more than 50 green polo shirts. On another rack are 27 identical pairs of khaki pants. On the floor are a half-dozen pairs of brown leather loafers, in variable condition depending on how long I've been wearing them. *1. Green polo shirt, khaki pants, and loafers. Think aeronautical engineer circa 1976, is my business uniform. I consciously adopted the look after the New Yorker's Larissa Mack Farquhar noted that that's all she saw me wear during the time she was profiling me for the magazine. Soon clients who read the piece expressed disappointment if I didn't show up in a green polo shirt and khaki pants. So I obliged them. Eventually I realized that my uniform was an act of liberation. Every time I packed my bag for a business trip, which could be 3 or 4 times a week, I didn't have to agonize about what to wear. No matter the meeting or audience, it was always green polos and khakis, one more decision I didn't have to deal with. In my small world of C-suite executives and HR professionals, it gradually became my signature, not unlike, pardon the hubris of the comparison, Tiger Woods wearing a red shirt and dark pants on Sunday in the final round of a golf tournament. But unlike Tiger, it wasn't a branding exercise for me, it was one small instance of awarding myself the freedom of no choice. Over time, choice avoidance, at least for the small choices that don't matter to me, has become one of my highest priorities. I pretty much agree to make time for any stranger who makes the effort to reach out to meet me, telling myself, it won't make me dumber. When I need a new assistant, I hire the first well-qualified interviewee. At a restaurant, I ask the waiter, what would you choose? This has the added benefit of eliminating buyer's remorse. You can't regret a decision you weren't tasked with making. This isn't sloth or indecisiveness. It's a conscious practice of dodging any non-essential choice in order to save my brain cells for the consequential decisions that occasionally arise in a day, such as agreeing to the 18-month commitment of taking on a new coaching client. Some people love making choices. CEOs, film directors, and interior designers come to mind. They enjoy the power of giving a thumbs up or down to an acquisition, or the length of an actor's hair, or the specific shade of gray wall paint. I don't. Perhaps you don't either. Yet extensive research shows that the process of making a choice probably represents the biggest expenditure of your mental energy each day, and it leads to depletion, which can ultimately lead to bad decisions. From the benign choice of what to have for breakfast, to the snap decision of answering or ignoring a ringing phone, to the time-consuming, often nerve-rattling process of researching, test driving, and haggling with sales managers in order to buy your next automobile. They all add up to an existence that is dominated by our choices. Asterisk 2. To live any life, you have to make choices. To achieve an earned life, you have to make choices with an expanded sense of scale, discipline, and sacrifice. In the 1960s, at my high school in Valley Station, after every major reading assignment, our 10th grade English teacher had us write an essay on any topic we wanted. The essay just had to relate in some way to the book, play, or short story we just finished. She called them freestyles. In 11th grade, our new English teacher said a similar drill, except he chose the topics. I asked him why he didn't give us freestyles. He said, I'm doing most of your classmates a favor. Students have complained for years that they don't have any ideas. Freedom to pick their own topic is the last thing they want. I hadn't thought about that teacher in decades until another teacher, Alan Mulally, taught me about the business plan review meetings he instituted in 2006 at the Ford Motor Company when he became CEO. The BPR, as it was known, was a rigorously structured weekly meeting held at 7 o'clock every Thursday morning in the Thunderbird Conference Room at Ford headquarters in Dearborn, Michigan, for the 16 top managers of the company. Attendance was mandatory, if not in person, then via teleconferencing. Surrogates were not allowed. Alan would start the meeting the same way each week. I'm Alan Mulally. I'm the CEO of Ford Motor Company. Our mission is... And then he'd go over the parent company's 5-year business plan, projections, and performance, with charts grading each data point under his control with the color green, on plan, yellow, improving but not yet on plan, and red, off plan. He'd finish within 5 minutes. Then each manager was expected to follow Alan's format note for note. Name, rank, plan, and the color-coded scores grading progress on their portfolio of projects, all in 5 minutes. Alan also required polite, collegial behavior in the meeting. No judgment, no criticism, no interrupting, no cynical asides. Have fun, never at other people's expense, he'd say. The BPR was a psychological safe space. The Ford executives initially had a hard time believing that the meeting was truly a no cynicism, no judgment zone. This is one reason the executives balked at assigning the color red to any of their projects. They feared their colleagues' derision. Alan shut down the sarcasm the first week simply by calling it out on the spot. All the executives got that message. Willingness to report red, i.e., admitting a weak spot in their division, took longer. No one wanted to test Alan's promise of transparency with no reprisal. A month into Alan's tenure, when the head of North America reported the first red at a shutdown Canadian production line, Alan applauded him for his honesty and visibility, a response that wasn't lost on the room. That's the moment Alan knew he had reached his leadership team. But not all of them. Keep in mind that except for the weekly 2 hours of the Thursday meeting, Alan left his team alone for much of the other 166 hours. He was there to serve, not micromanage, them, believing that the transparency and decency he demanded in the BPR would eventually penetrate the rest of Ford. This process began to reset the culture. Nevertheless, 2 of his senior executives told him they couldn't live with his philosophy, in effect admitting that being nice felt phony and inauthentic. He told each of them that he was sorry they felt that way, but it was their choice, not his. They knew the rules, no exceptions. He wasn't firing them. They were firing themselves. Readers of my book Triggers will note that this is not the first time I've devoted paragraphs to Alan Mueller's methods. I think his BPR is a brilliant management tool, the most effective strategy I've encountered to create alignment between people's stated plans and how well they execute the plan. It is a masterstroke of accountability that more managers should emulate. But in recent years I've come to appreciate the BPR's strictures for its psychologically incisive lessons, not so much about our choices but rather about what follows, namely, how we take responsibility for those choices. This is particularly apt in the context of creating an earned life. Alan's rules for how to behave in the BPR were a gift to the executives, not, as they initially feared, a draconian attempt to control them. Alan gifted his new team with what I call the agency of no choice. They could either behave in a positive way or find work elsewhere, which sounds like he was offering them a binary choice, except that it wasn't because the executives could have left Ford on their own steam for other jobs before Alan ever called the first BPR. Alan wasn't the one coercing their departure. He was giving them only one choice: behave and communicate in a positive way in the BPR, which is effectively no choice. It was a new show. They had to commit to it or get off the stage. This was the no choice part of the agency of no choice. Alan fostered the agency part by making the BPR a weekly event. It's important to understand the meaning of plan in the context of Alan Mueller's Ford Motor Company. There was no mystery about the purpose of the business plan review. It was in the meeting's official name, to review the business plan. At Ford, the plan was everything, and there were many plans, the overarching plan for the parent company plus 16 plans within the plan, one for each of the 16 division chiefs. Everyone helped formulate these plans. No one was confused. Each plan was recapped word for word, like a mantra, at the start of each executive's 5-minute presentation. And it happened every week. Everyone in the BPR knew the mission, their individual targets, what had to be done to hit these targets, and when victory could be declared. Consider the dynamic this created in the BPR. In giving the executives only one set of options: show up at the BPR, know your plan, report on your progress, practice total transparency, be nice. Alan was securing their commitment and encouraging them to display this commitment out in the open. He was creating accountability both to the group and to themselves. Every week, all the executives had to hear their colleagues announce their progress over the previous 7 days, and then compare it with their own. For competitive executives accustomed to internal and external validation, the BPR was a daunting, highly motivating environment where they could either feel self-inflicted shame or well-earned satisfaction. It wasn't a difficult choice. Making them report their numbers every week added urgency to the process. The senior managers couldn't procrastinate or allow themselves to be distracted by anything else. They had to stick to the plan. Alan hoped they would show progress each Thursday, that they would have turned some of their reds to yellow, some of their yellows to greens. But if they didn't, he didn't jump down their throat. In fact, he applauded their honesty. A few reds didn't make them bad people. They could do better the next Thursday. If they continued reporting reds, maybe they couldn't do it alone, so he got them help. But eventually they broke through. The executives knew that. As with the mandatory attendance at the BPR, they had no choice but to do better. That overwhelming sense of weekly urgency, absent in other parts of our lives, gave these executives agency over their future. They knew what was expected of them and that they alone were responsible for their performance. When they reported greens that were once yellows and reds, their success felt fully earned. That is the gift of Alan's BPR. He gave his executives agency to fulfill their potential. When you have only one choice, the only acceptable response is to make that choice work. If Alan's approach can turn around a failing industrial behemoth, saddled with competition from every corner and crippling debt and liabilities, it can be reimagined and applied to turning a less than fulfilling life into an earned one. We'll come back to this again in part 2. But for now, let's deal with choice. I've always thought that the luckiest people on earth, at least in terms of career, are the ones who can honestly say, I get paid to do for a living what I would gladly do for free. Musician, video gamer, park ranger, fashion designer, food critic, professional poker player, dancer, personal shopper, member of the clergy. All of them excel at what they love and love what they excel at, and the world is willing to pay for it. Whether the payday is staggering or puny, they rarely regret the path they've chosen, because it was the only path they could see for themselves. In other words, they had no choice. Not far behind these lucky few were the accomplished people who, when asked how they came to their current station in life, reply, it was the only thing I was good at. I've heard this line from advertising wizards and gardeners and software designers and journalists. They're not so fortunate that they would do their jobs for free, but the ease they felt in choosing their career path is identical to what the video gamer or cleric felt. They believed they had no other choice. Creating an earned life begins with a choice, sifting through all the ideas you harbor for your future, assuming you have ideas, and choosing to commit to one idea above all the others. Easy to say, not so easy to do. Perhaps you are a restless creative type with an excess of ideas who cannot pinpoint the single idea you want to work on. Perhaps you have the opposite problem. You lack ideas and automatically default to inertia instead. In such a tight spot, where do you begin? How do you make up your mind about the future, the sacrifices you'll have to make, who you share it with, and where it happens? How can you be sure your eventual choice offers you the best chance for achieving fulfillment rather than suffering regret? The conventional first step is to ask yourself a question such as what do I want to do next, or what would make me happier? To which I say, not so fast. You're putting the cart before the horse. First, you need to run through a few preliminary steps, and each of those steps should be helping you boil down your myriad options to a single point at which you really have no choice. Creating an earned life is first and foremost a matter of scale, of going really big on the important things that keep you on message, small on the things that do not influence the outcome. This is the secret of living an earned life. It is lived at the extremes. You are maximizing what you need to do, minimizing what you deem unnecessary. I didn't appreciate this until I was 40. Given the fulfillment I've received and the relatively few regrets I've suffered as I write this in my 73rd year, I believe I've earned my life. I credit it to some soul searching I did 3 decades ago, in 1989, when it became apparent that my random but fairly linear career path was not heading toward the placid working for the weekend life I had imagined. Lyda and I had 2 young children and a hefty mortgage. For the first time in my life, I was contemplating working solo, as a corporate trainer, without the backup of an organization or partners. If I succeeded at it, I'd be traveling extensively and spending more time away from my family, which worried me. This was the risky, uncharted territory that occasioned my soul searching. So I conducted a cost-benefit analysis of what such a life offered and demanded. Did I have the psychological and emotional resources to sustain myself and be happy? And was I willing to maximize these resources consistently over a long period of time, fighting off other priorities and distractions? In other words, was I willing to pay the price to succeed at this new path? This wasn't a test of my motivation, ability, understanding, or confidence. I could do the job. It was an appraisal of how much I would be sacrificing. I was establishing my priorities and confronting the trade-offs I was willing to accept. Could I find balance in what some people might regard as an insanely unbalanced life? I listed, in alphabetical order, the 6 factors that I believe govern our sense of fulfillment in life. Achievement, engagement, happiness, meaning, purpose, relationships. I raced quickly through the non-worldly factors of purpose, engagement, achievement, meaning, and happiness. They were links in a familiar chain. Purpose meant I had a reason for what I'm doing, which ensured full engagement, which improved my odds of achieving my goal, thus adding meaning to my life as well as a fleeting sense of happiness. I didn't doubt that my new gig would deliver all of these. Maximize one and the others will follow. What remained was relationships, namely, my family. My concerning issue was the effect constant travel would have on my relationship with Lyda and our children. As I considered these questions, I realized I was not facing the typical all-or-nothing binary choice that confuses so many of us, as if I were free to choose between traveling and staying home. The facts were: A. This was my best idea for living my own life at the time, something that aligned with my training, my interests, and my desire to help people in a meaningful way. B. It was gratifying that people wanted to hear what I had to say and I could make a living at it. And, most important, C. Constant travel was a non-negotiable part of the job, no different than if I were a long-haul trucker or flight attendant. In other words, I wasn't torn between 2 choices. I had only one choice, which, as I've said, is really no choice. The only question I faced was one of scale. What were the dimensions of my travel obligations? How many days on the road qualified as maximizing, and what would be the consequences of minimizing my presence at home? I wasn't confronting a difficult choice between corporate trainer and some unknown alternative. That ship had sailed. I was merely negotiating the terms and dimensions of a trade-off. If an earned life is one of productive overkill, of going all in on what matters, accompanied by sacrifice and trade-offs, that was the moment I got serious about earning my life. I had no other choice. Skip notes. *1 Some years ago I had 3 Bell South executives as my house guests. I gave them a tour of my home, including my closet. When they saw the row of identical khakis, I heard one executive say to the others, "Thank goodness, I thought he only owned 1 pair of pants." *2 If I asked you to keep a log of all the choices you made in a day, starting, of course, with the decision to accept or decline this request, and then your choice of paper, pad, notebook, or digital device to record the log, and then the ink color in the pen, if in fact you chose a pen over pencil over smartphone. You see where I'm going with this? How many choices would you estimate you make in a day? Hint. I made choice avoiding extremist and I stopped counting for my 1-day log when I hit 300 before 4 p.m. Oceanofpdf.com. Exercise. Flip the script. The first obstacle to earning your life is deciding what that life should be. If you don't have your own ideas on the subject, you're relying on luck or the assistance and insight of others. But how can you tell when a life-changing idea has been dropped into your lap? How do you prevent inertia, or your comfort with the status quo, or a failure of imagination, or any other impediment from obscuring the chance of a lifetime that's been handed to you? How do you end up with a turning point epiphany, not a missed opportunity? It's up to you to answer that big question. Do this. Although I can't command you to be more creative or to recognize the luck that's staring you in the face, I can offer a 2-step exercise to help you get there on your own. 1. Do for yourself what you have done for others. Can you recall the times you've given someone else a piece of life-altering advice? Maybe you set up two people on a blind date and they ended up getting happily married. Maybe you alerted a friend to a job opening that was perfect for her. Maybe you've been reminded by a grateful friend of an offhand remark you made years earlier to her that she regards as a turning point in her life. Maybe you fired an employee, convinced you were doing him a favor, and later on the employee thanked you, admitting you were right, that getting sacked was the best thing that ever happened to him. Maybe you recognized something special, rather than deficient, in another person and told them they were capable of so much more. In each case you recognized something in others that they couldn't see for themselves. That should put to rest the issue of whether you're capable of imagining a new path. You've done it for others. Do it for yourself. 2. Begin with a basic question. What do I want to do for the rest of my life? What can I do that's meaningful? What would make me happy? These are not basic. They are deep, multifaceted questions that should be asked throughout your life, but don't expect an easy or quick answer. Basic questions address one factor only, because for nearly all of our major life decisions we don't require 4 or 5 strong supporting reasons. One reason will do. For example, we marry people because we love them, and that explanation alone is enough to overwhelm any other reason, for or against. Asterisk. Do you love him? Is a basic question. So is, who's your customer? And, will this work? And, can we afford this? And, where did we go wrong? And, are you serious? What are you running away from? Is basic. So is, what are you running toward? Any question simply phrased that demands a deep, soulful examination of the facts and your abilities and intentions, i.e., that elicits the hard truth, qualifies as a basic question. The most common question I pose when I'm advising people on their next big life move is as basic as it gets. Where do you want to live? It's so basic that people rarely pose it to themselves. But since we all hold an image in our mind of the ideal place for us, we answer with little hesitation. Then the real thinking begins about our future. What do we imagine doing all day in this ideal place? Can we find meaningful work there? How would the people we love feel about this move? If we have children or grandchildren, could we tolerate living far apart from them? The specific choice of place also speaks volumes about our ideal lifestyle. People who answer, Hawaii, or the Swiss Alps, are not envisioning the same life as people who answer, New York, or Berlin. You can't see a Broadway show in the Swiss Alps, and you can't hike up a mountain in Berlin. Which inspires the next basic question. What will I do there every day? That's the value of a basic question. It forces us to come up with very basic answers, which in turn inspire more questions that need to be answered. This is how we discover how we truly feel about our life now and what we want it to look like. Sometimes we discover that we're happy with the status quo. Other times we realize we're not satisfied at all. That's when the creativity begins. Skip notes. Asterisk, I assert this from experience. After 35 years in San Diego, Lyda and I moved to Nashville for one reason alone. Our grandkids live there. The fact that Nashville turned out to be a great place to live is a bonus. A better quality of life or any other reason never factored into our decision. Oceanofpdf.com. Chapter 5. Aspiration. Privileging your future over your present. Until now, we've been discussing the earned life in the context of finding a fulfilling career, stressing how difficult it is for many of us to choose and commit to what will be our life's work. We tremble before making our choice in life, wrote Isak Dinesen, and having made it again tremble in fear of having chosen wrong. For many people, however, committing to a career path does not constitute an